Good evening and welcome to Q&A live from the beautiful Melbourne Recital Centre. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight. The man they call the human headline, controversial broadcaster Derryn Hinch. A former Labor Speaker of the House and a Burke, comedian Dave Hughes, who's been pumped at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. The founder and CEO of the Young and Well Cooperative Research Centre, Jane Burns. And the Minister for Trade and Investment, Andrew Robb. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. And remember, if you've got a live Twitter question to send us, add @Quanta to help us find it among the thousands that come in. Let's go straight to our first question from the audience, from Benjamin Atkinson.
Yes, good evening. Australian Muslims need to take a litmus test. Do they reject jihad and do they reject the caliphate?
Derryn Hinch.
Well, I partly agree. I don't agree with what you're saying in terms of they must take the sort of litmus test, but I would agree with one thing, and that is that we saw Daniel Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, over the weekend, desperately trying to sound like he worked for the ABC and not saying that these men who've been allegedly involved in this plot over Anzac Day were Muslim extremists. I mean, they are Muslim extremists, and to try and say that's not the case, and I have this and I have that, I think it defeats the purpose. But I reject your litmus test idea. I think that's extreme.
It'd be a very different country if we had to take a litmus test on what we believed.
This is the thing with, like, Reclaim Australia. I was offended by it because I don't think we've lost Australia, so the reclaim word pisses me off anyway. But they say, well, we don't want, you've got to fight against Reclaim Australia from Sharia law. We haven't got Sharia law. We've got to reclaim Australia from this. I mean, I don't like Sharia law, and it won't happen here. I'm not fond of Koori courts either. We've got one system of justice. It should stay that way. It's not perfect, as I well know, but this is the only system we've got, and we should stay with it.
Anna Burke.
Any extremism is wrong. So who's going to take the litmus test? You know, Catholics who were part of the IRA, you know, people who want to tell us that, you know, we can't eat any sort of meat, you know, the vegan extremists who put, you know, vegan signs all over the footpaths. What litmus test do you take and who do you give it to? It's extremism that we need to knock out, not one religion or another.
And how do you do it, Anna? Because you narrow it down. You can narrow it down to this small minority of real radicals, and as we know that it's reported anyway that the young men arrested in the weekend raids were all connected in one way to the Al Furqan Islamic Centre in Springvale. Is that where you see the problem lying?
No, I think the problem lies in us reaching out to individuals who feel disconnected. And are they going to this mosque because they feel disconnected from our society? So what are we doing to ensure that, you know, everybody in this room, everybody feels part of being part of Australian, being part of our community? I'm not sure you can single out one group. Do you go, as we saw recently, and burn down one Catholic church and say that everybody involved in the Catholic faith is is involved in paedophilia? Where do you draw the line? I'm not sure how you do that, but I know it's about connecting and making people feel that they belong to this great nation that we have.
Dave Hughes.
Well, I think we all want to, I mean, just what annoys me is how people feel they're different to other people. I mean, whether that's Reclaim Australia or Muslims, we're all human. Everyone's a human. You might think that you're special because you're some certain religion, or because you're an atheist, you might think you're special. You're not. Everyone, we're all the same. I just wish everyone knew we're all the same.
Atheists are not. We're not special.
No, you're not special, Derryn. So yeah, I just wish that when people think they're separate from other people, but they're not. We all got the same DNA, people. We're all going to die, and I just wish we could all enjoy our lives and not thinking and wanting to be separate from other people, or wanting to think that other people are separate, because I don't think we are. No one's separate from anyone else.
Dave, do you think the local Muslim leaders have done enough?
Oh, look, I don't know. I'm certainly not an expert on that field, but I just hope that everyone talks about the fact that we're not different to everyone else. I hope the local Muslim leaders say that, you know, look, religion's tough. I don't know.
The local Muslim leaders, especially in Sydney, should have spoken out much stronger, more early. I mean, the bloke up there I call Sheikh Al-Ukulele. I mean, he was a disgrace. He should have been thrown out of this country years ago. I think it was Keating who let him stay. So I think the moderate leaders should have spoken out more, as they are starting to do now.
Andrew Robb.
Well, I feel that there's been a heightened level of tension amongst Australians now for some months. We've had two quite frightening, very frightening incidents with in Dever Hills last year, 2 police attacked, and we've had, of course, the Martin Square incident. I was, I think, the second year in Parliament, about 2005, I had ministerial responsibility for multicultural affairs, and it was the time of the Cronulla riots, and there were issues to be dealt with, and I dealt with the 100 imams through that year, and I felt that they weren't taking responsibility in the same way that a lot of the church leaders are being pilloried for not taking responsibility for problems in their domain over recent decades. In the same way, there is a problem in the community. It's 400 people under inspection by ASIO. There's 150 fighting, in the Middle East. There is a problem, and the leadership of the Muslim community, the imams in particular, I think should be doing a lot more to look after their community in Australia.
Now, Jane, I'd bring you in, but your mic's got a problem. We're going to resolve that by giving you a handheld mic in a moment. Let's go to another question down in the audience from Zafar Ograk. Thank
you, Tony. As a high school teacher who lives and teaches in the low socioeconomic suburbs, the weekend's terror raids, the magnitude of it has alarmed many Muslim Australians, including myself. Does the panel believe that there is a direct correlation between the rise of Islamophobia on social media and the radicalisation of young Muslim Australians?
Derryn Hinch, we'll start with you.
Well, I'll be a bit careful, believe it or not, because they are before the courts for the terror raids at the weekend. I have some problems with it, though, in that you have the Prime Minister, you have the Victorian Premier all talking about the increased security, etc., etc. We had 5 men arrested at the weekend. 3 of them were let free within several hours. Only 1 was charged. 1 has now been detained without charge for the next 14 days. I mean, whatever happened to Tony Abbott and this John Wayne moment of, more jail, less bail? You've got 3 men in this so-called terrorist group who are already back out there. 1 is being charged with possession of prohibited weapons by summons. And that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, they're either dangerous people who allegedly have committed offences and should be detained, or they are not. And I find this very strange that 3 of them have walked free.
I'm listening very closely to what you're saying, because I know that you've spent some time in jail as well for various comments that you've made, so we'll monitor them very carefully.
And I'll be very careful.
Tony,
program. I'm not going back to jail this year, okay? I've made a New Year's resolution. But one thing people do not know, and I heard on radio today people saying, well, that one is being held under the detention order, nobody's naming him anymore. Well, the fact is, now that he's been held, it is against the law. His name has been legally suppressed and will remain that way, and no, I won't use it. Okay?
Jane, let's hear from you, and sorry you've got to use a handheld mic at the moment.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Can I talk about social cohesion, acceptance of diversity, and to your question around the importance of youth leadership in this space, particularly in social media? I think it's fair to say, and I don't want to comment on the actual events themselves, but what's really clear is that if we start to think about how we might build social cohesion in our communities, how we might provide voice to young people so that they can take positive action on issues that they care about, and how we actually build into our communities, our schools, our families, our workplaces, acceptance of diversity so that people feel connected, they feel valued, they feel able to participate in meaningful ways. That is what will make Australia a great country that is accepting of diversity, accepting of the many great differences that we have in this country.
Andrew, Robb. Bearing in mind that Islamophobia is the fear or the hatred of Islam, the question was, are we doing enough in school to de-radicalise youth and tackle Islamophobia?
Well, again, I get back to the narrative before. I can remember that year there was a rise of Islamophobia, right? And I used to say to people, well, what about the Turks? They've been for 40 years out in Footscray in Melbourne here and related suburbs, huge Broadmeadows, huge population of Turkish Muslims who practice and still practice in the most, the normal way. And people say, oh, no, they're not real they're not what we're talking about. And I said, but they're the biggest Muslim community in Australia, and they still are. There's 250,000 of them, right? And my point again is, you know, I think the leadership in that community, Muslim community, has given a balanced life to their kids, and they have made it, they've coexisted, they're very much part of the Australian community, and so I think it's not the rest of us. I mean, we've got to help. And I used to say, government and the community can help you, but you've got the problem. It's principally your problem. You've got to show the leadership. We've got to do whatever we can to help you in that regard.
But other countries do fund de-radicalisation programs. The Germans have one, and it seems to work. And I'm wondering why there is no de-radicalisation program funded by the federal government in this country.
Well, I've been there a couple of times in the last 12 months in Germany. It seemed to me there's a much greater heightened sense of threat in that community, so I'm not sure about your assertion. But all I say to you again, the majority of the Muslim community are seen and are you know, they're not a source of fear or threat or anything. In fact, they're seen as like every other Australian. But there is, you know, a lot of the other smaller communities, and that's what we should be finding out. Why is one working? Why are 250,000 perfectly part of our community and the others a source of fear and apprehension?
Well, you'd hope the raids don't make things worse. I mean, what I would love, I mean, and we don't know the details, but you'd hope that maybe in 10 years' time there's some young men walking down the Yarra River with their families, you know, their young children, and maybe looking back on something that happened a long time ago and being thankful that they're still living in Australia in a peaceful country with their young family, and that, you know, what happened in their youth didn't, if you know what I mean, that the raids actually possibly stopped things happening.
Well, provided they don't go and fight in Syria, of course. And in fact, some of the people from this centre have actually gone to Syria, and they are in communication with some of these other people who are still in Melbourne, and you hear this on Twitter, the social media connection is maintained. You have one fellow saying, brothers, why don't you do something now? So, I mean, how do we actually deal with that, Dave? That's a complicated issue, isn't it?
It does, but I think it starts with the families, does it? Look, they're rebels with a cause. I mean, it's a really tough one.
But, you know, I did Harmony Day, and a beautiful Muslim girl said that she now fears going in the street with a headscarf. So where do we go in this society? If we're going to have half of our community terrified to be out there and identified by their religion. I mean, we used to pride ourselves on being a multicultural, diverse, tolerant. Mind you, I hate that word tolerant. Surely we should be an accepting society. And if we're not going to have acceptance, then we are going to create extremism, aren't we? If we're not going to say we're all part of this great fabric, look around this room, people.
But don't most people
look around this room.
Don't most people in Australia say that? Yeah. I mean, 99.95% of people
exactly
are.
Right. Exactly. But we need to live it, and we need to have the leadership from government down.
There's one element in the room here, and that is our legal system. Because when you've got magistrates like Popovich in Victoria, who lets a man out on bail, who has threatened Joe Hockey, has other things. Now he's pleaded guilty, so it's all right. He has said he hopes that the next person executed by IS is an Australian, and it's done in public. Now, the courts have to take this seriously. Man Monis from Martin Place should never have been out on bail, should not have been able to walk into the Lint Cafe. The man I'm talking about in Melbourne should not be able to. So the courts have a big responsibility as well.
Now, Dave just talked about families, and of course de-radicalisation programs in Europe, for example, work very closely with the families and friends of anyone in danger of being radicalised. Do you know why they don't have such programs here?
No, I don't. And in fact, in the Hayder case, and a lot of these people are connected to Hayder, the young man who slashed the policeman. I would hope that they could should have by now, legal system, should have brought his inquest on faster, because something may have come out of that coronial inquest from which we could have learned something, and the police might have learned something, but it's been months and months, and that inquest has not been held.
But, there are 400 ASIO priority investigations going on at the moment. The community is at a level of fear that I don't think's been around for a long time. And it's not just an Australia phenomenon. I mean, this is happening worldwide. You've got a bunch of madmen in Syria and Iraq who are threatening the world. That's their view of the thing. And people are responding all over the world, Germany, but a whole lot of other countries through Europe. This is a global problem, and it's not easy to deal with. And in the meantime, people do get, naturally, they fear anyone that they may think in any way is associated. Right now, as leaders, you've got to try and disabuse people of that, but it is human nature that's going on, and it's down to leadership. And I really feel, Anna said it's government, which I agree, and the rest of the community, but it is very much leadership within those communities. And a lot of those places where these young people are getting radicalised, they're going to centres where there are imams who really need to take hold of this situation and lead the charge against those young people being radicalised.
Okay, let's move on to a very different subject. Our next question comes from Joanne Allard.
Thank you. Hughesy, are you feeling thirsty? Are you going to have a bit of a drink after the show tonight, or what? Obviously, these are not appropriate questions for a Q&A panel, but as demonstrated by Warnie after the World Cup, it is viewed as appropriate when celebrating sporting success. Do you believe these attitudes have a place in certain parts of our culture?
Look, I know Warnie, and the thing about Warnie, he doesn't drink hardly at all. He's not a drinker at all, so he looks like he is, but he's not. Seriously, so, and I mean...
What about Tony Abbott? He doesn't look like a drinker, but he is,
no,
as it turns out.
No, but I mean, I don't think you have to drink to look tough either. I don't drink at all. I think the toughest man in the pub is surrounded by a group of drinkers and says, no, I'll be right. That's the toughest guy in the pub.
So, were you surprised to see the Prime Minister put down a schooner in, 6 seconds?
Nothing the Prime Minister does surprises me, to be honest, because whenever you think you've got him worked out, he does something else. So, no, I mean, he's got a good lungs.
I think it's a bit sad. Look, and I used to drink for Australia, all right? So I'll admit that. But
now, you're on your second liver, aren't you?
That's true. But in the case of Tony Abbott, this thing about this blokey stuff, it'll probably help him because, I mean, Kevin Rudd ends up going into a strip club in New York and it improves his reputation somehow. Tony Abbott, bunch of grown men, supposedly grown men, standing around going, down, 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 while another grown man opens his throat and pours beer down it. If that makes you an Aussie bloke, I don't want to be one.
I'm going to, we've actually got another question on this subject. Well, before we bring in the rest of the panel, we'll just go to Lauren Hayes and then you can come in on that.
My question's for Andrew Robb. Yeah. Do you think that the Prime Minister's recent display of irresponsible drinking was an act of peer pressure or an attempt to become more popular with younger voters?
Well, it amuses me a little bit because Bob Hawke, who 60-odd years ago did the same thing, and again last year, and the community response was Bob was a hero. He was a bloke. He was a good thing, right?
He was a university student, I think, not a Prime Minister. He wasn't drinking when he was Prime Minister.
Well, so what? He was a hero last year. Once you're Prime Minister, you're always Prime Minister, in my view. And
Kevin Rudd would like to hear that.
I must say, I've always thought that we should do what they do in the US. Once a president, they're always called the president because I think it's an honoured position and it's an enormous job, and so that's another point. But get back to Lauren, I do feel that he was not looking for a camera shot. I mean, someone's taken this. It was a private gathering, so he wasn't looking to be to do this.
Are you absolutely sure it wasn't a misguided photo opportunity?
I think it was a setup.
Okay, all right.
I mean, he was at a pub,
you're just looking for a headline, and we're trying to create one. But I felt that, I've played football for years, and these sort of situations, it happens, and I don't feel that this is any great crime that's been committed. In fact, quite the opposite, and we should just get over it.
I think Australia has a drinking culture. Australia has a drinking culture and it costs us $15 billion a year. It costs us 5,000 lives lost. Yours was almost one of them. So
mine actually wasn't from drinking. Mine was from liver cancer. But not an excuse. But the fact that I drank, I got cirrhosis of the liver, and that made my choices much less. So that was
impacts on your quality of
my own
life.
blame. I caused my own problem. Yeah.
So Jill Stark's written a book called High Sobriety. Chris Rain, who was Queensland Young Australian of the Year, has set up Hello Sunday Morning. And it's basically set up just to challenge the drinking culture in Australia, to raise awareness, but to also say, take a break from it, it's okay. I am not Pollyanna about this at all. I love a good drink as much as anyone else, as people who know me would say. But what Chris, and I think what Jill's written about, is the fact that it is a part of our culture. And it is hard when you go to the pub and you're not drinking. And it is hard, we celebrate drinks with christenings, with deaths, with, you name it, we use drinks to celebrate it. So there is a major question, which is a public health question around what do we actually do to start to think about how we drink responsibly and how we drink to enjoy ourselves, not to get ourselves blotto and written off every weekend.
I think that goes back to our original question about the Shane Warne. I was sitting there watching the final with my son, and he's 13. He said to me, why is he on about drinking? Why aren't we talking about we've just won the World Cup? Yeah. And it was like everybody thirsty, everyone having a drink. And he must have said it, and I thought, is it because of the sponsors? As opposed to we've won this game and that's how you celebrate. I mean, Cricket Australia in local teams has really gone out of their way to say, let's get rid of the drinking culture in cricket because we want families involved, we want kids to the club. We don't want to keep this myth going that the only way you can have a good time is to be blotto and wake up Sunday morning and not remember anything of the night before.
My kids have never had a drink and they have a good time every single day. So, and can I say, I haven't had a drink for 22 years. And
Dave, is that because you actually had a drinking problem?
I was not a good drinker, yes. And I was really, and I was depressed because of it. So, and I stopped a long time ago. And my life improved actually did improve immediately, and I was 22 at the time. So it was, my friends were like, what? You're not drinking? But you know what? They accepted me almost straight away. And I didn't lose one friend. You don't have to drink.
Is my memory failing me? Always. We drank a lot, but we didn't seem to do this binge drinking.
No, we did. Did we?
We did,
Absolutely, we did.
Country girl, we were binge drinkers.
Just drank to get drunk?
You drank to get drunk.
You drank to have fun?
I drank because I love the taste of wine.
Well, that's because you're a wanker.
Takes one to know one. Takes one to know one.
That is true.
Okay, now that we've raised it to that level, let's move on to something completely different. We've got another question. It's from Samuel Adeloju.
Andrew, Rob, you stepped down in 2009 when you suffered crippling depression. Amazingly, you came back again later on to win the last election, with the Liberal and National Party. And you have since taken on the role as a Minister for Trade and Investment, which I think they are really amazing achievement. I really think you are an extraordinary role model for people who suffer depression in this country. I just wonder, what is your mechanism or process for dealing with depression during and post-depression stage that has enabled you to carry out your role successfully as a parliamentarian and a minister?
Andrew, I suppose that means a coping mechanism, really. Do you have one?
Yes. Well, look, thanks very much for the question. Look, I had an experience which I know all about, but whatever I say doesn't necessarily relate to anyone else. I have learnt there's so many variations of this. But for me, I had a problem for 43 years, which I didn't want to admit. And I think because of the stigma attached. In fact, I look back, I think most of the jobs I got, I would never have got if I had psychiatrists on my CV. And in fact, if I was still 40, people asked me, would you do it again? I'd confront it at 40 or 30 or earlier, but I wouldn't tell too many people, that's for sure. It's still there. There's a lot of that stigma still there. But for me, the coping, I tried all sorts of things. Most of the time I didn't admit that I had a problem. I kept saying I wasn't a morning person to myself. and thinking that what it was. But I did really odd things like, when I sneezed, I would get a hit of endorphins. And so I drove to work for 10 years at one stage, and I'd look at the sun, because I sneeze when I look at the sun, and I'd get these hits from sneezing. Someone told me that if you smile or laugh, you release endorphins or whatever, and you feel better. So for 10 years, we were living out of town around Canberra at the time. 10 years, I drove to work with a pen in my mouth, because someone told me if your face is sort of configured like you're smiling, your brain thinks you are, and it releases endorphins. So I don't know what people thought driving past me or the other way. But so I tried everything. Swimming helped me in the last 15 years. I swim every day in the bay down here, which people think I'm mad too. But that was a great thing for me. Music, classical music in particular, or jazz, was a great thing for me. Art, in the end, I mean, I never had a background where we were exposed to a lot of that, but art now is a great relaxant for me. But in my case, it was medication that really did the trick. And for the last 4 years, I've had better days than any day for the 43 years before.
Andrew, when you finally admitted it, I mean, I imagine someone told you this is something you should do, seek help. When you finally admitted it and you started on medication, I imagine, how long did that take to work for you? Because it's different for everybody.
Yeah, well, it took me 6 months. I mean, the psychiatrist said that I finally got to after confronting it. In fact, I gave Jeff Kennett a ring, and because I knew he's involved with Beyond Blue, and told him I got a problem. And a little summary, he said, I don't know anything about it, but I'll get some help for you. So the next Wednesday, I'm in there with a very good fellow, and he nailed it in 5 minutes. And I've never felt such a sense of relief. But he said, we'll get you onto medication. It'll take you 4 weeks. You'll get some side effects, and it might need some patience. Well, all I heard was, you're going to be right? And the qualifications. That was the next 4 weeks were the worst 4 weeks of my life. I had depression 24/7. I really reacted against the pills. But I had so much confidence in him, I kept going. Plus, I'd had a long time suffering from this thing, and I was determined that if I could get better, I'm going to give it my best shot. But it took me 6 months. I never improved at any stage for that 6 months, and all of a sudden, I had tried different pills, but also different levels of different pills. But finally, I woke up one morning, or 2 or 3 mornings, and the head's clear, and I couldn't believe it. And I didn't say anything to my wife for a couple of days, because I thought, this will pass. But I haven't looked back ever since.
Jane used to run Beyond Blue, so is this story ring familiar to you? I mean, every case is different, every person is different. The time they take to adjust to medication, that's different. But what do you think when you're listening to this story from Andrew?
Look, I think this is a perfect story of someone talking about their experience. We know that it can take 15 years for people to get the right help. What you've talked about are some of the mechanisms you put in place to look after your well-being and to keep you functioning at work. What's fascinating with your story is, and it's true, when we started Beyond Blue, we had Gary McDonald, we had Neil Cole, Jeff Kennett, myself and Ian Hickey, and Ian started Beyond Blue, not me, but going out to local communities to talk about the complex nature of mental illness, the fact that their stigma still exists even though we're 15 years in. We've had brave people stand up who are role models, but what's been really important within our schools, our universities, our workplaces and our communities is that there's greater understanding of the signs, the symptoms, but we still haven't affected great behaviour change. So we've still got a lot of work to do. Now this takes leadership, and just to pick up on your point about Jeff, Beyond Blue was started with the leadership from the federal government and the state governments coming together. Michael Woolridge at a federal level, Bronwyn Pike at a state level. Now they had to work together to find a solution, and you involved communities, you involved people with a lived experience, you got the academics working together to really think about how do we actually address this issue. A campaign's not going to solve the challenge. We went out to communities, we talked to communities, we heard stories from farmers, from people who were really vulnerable, and they talked about their own lived experience, and that's critical to the work that we need to do to build on the fabulous foundation, the showcase of what it means to work together in partnership, state and federal, consumers and carers, families, local community solutions. That's fundamental to
That's all wonderful, but the stigma is still there.
There's no doubt about it.
It's huge. I mean, if you said to most people, would you tell your boss that you suffer from depression? You wouldn't tell. You say, no, I won't, because they won't understand.
There are good examples of workplaces taking the lead on it. And it's not just a tick the box, let's go in and provide an education program. It is thinking holistically about workplaces, about schools, about universities, about communities, about, well, what do you actually need to do? Education is not enough. You need to show leadership from the top. You need to empower people to look after their well-being. All of the things that you described, music, smiling, all of those
Jane,
things.
I remember covering the 1972 presidential election at McGovern, and Jack Anderson wrote a column that Thomas Eggleton, the vice presidential candidate, had seen a psychiatrist. And within several weeks, McGovern said, doesn't matter, he's my man. Within about a week, with the pressure, he was forced off the ticket.
But here's an example of someone who has
I know, but that's the way it was,
about
and sadly, I think it still exists.
Let me bring it, Dave. I'll bring you in this way, because you said earlier that you had depression. I mean, do you mean that in the formal sense? Or?
Well, I wasn't. When I was like 21, I mean, I was drinking heavily, and I was also smoking a lot of marijuana, and I was having sort of some episodes at night, and I said to my mum, I think I've got schizophrenia. I actually said it to her. Like, I spoke to my mother about it, and she's a nurse. She was a nurse, and she said, well, let's go to a doctor and ask about it. And we went to a doctor together. She was a beautiful mother, obviously, and she helped me out. And the doctor, we had a chat about it, and I told him I smoked marijuana, and he told me to maybe stop doing that, and I did. I stopped smoking marijuana, and I stopped drinking.
Yours is a great example of what boys do.
But as soon as I went to that doctor with my mother, and it took me courage to say to Mum that I thought I've got an issue here, but we went to the doctor together, and when I walked out of that doctor's surgery, I felt so much better just having told people about it, and that was the road to recovery started then. And,
I just want to talk about Nathan Thompson quickly, because I know...
Very quickly, because we've got quite a few topics to get to.
Back in 2003, so this is within a footy club, culture of blokiness and being a really physically fit man. Now, Nathan Thompson in 2003 stood up, and he had his coach there, he had the president of the club, he had his teammates surrounding him, and that club and the AFL and the AFL Players Association have taken responsibility for looking after the mental health of players. Now, without doubt, it does not look, and there is still stigma, but those examples are good examples of what it means to get the full backing of your colleagues, the leadership, and the young guys who literally supported him.
Winston Churchill had depression, and he did okay.
About 4 bottles of brandy a day.
Well,
that's true. In the bath as well. But can I just ask you whether you accept that things are now changing? It's taken a hell of a long time for people to confront these issues publicly, but people are doing it now. And in your view, will it change?
It is changing, but too slowly. And
too slowly.
I still think the stigma is there. And I think in the world of professionalism and work, I think you still have trouble. If you said to your boss, hey, look, I suffer from depression, they say, well, you may not. They may say, oh, we'll look after you, but you don't get promoted, or when it comes time to get rid of people, you'll be the top of the list to go. It's awful to say that, but I think that's still the truth.
OK, we're not finished with this subject, but we've got another question on it, in fact. And if you find the topics we're discussing troubling in any way and you'd like to talk to someone, please call Lifeline on 131 114 or access their online services at lifeline.org.au or call Beyond Blue on 1300 22 4636. If you need immediate help, call 000. The next question comes from Lisa Sweeney.
Thanks, Tony. In the 5 months since the Mental Health Commission handed down its findings into mental health programs and services, and when the review was leaked at the beginning of last week, approximately 1,025 Australians died by suicide. The report acknowledges that current funding allocations fails to adequately prevent illness, respond to people in crisis and support recovery. Does the panel have any ideas as to how we can translate the findings of this important review into action?
Jane, we'll start with you.
Start with me. Imagine this is this room wiped out in 1 week. And that is a national tragedy. So let me talk to you about the national...
There's an estimated 7 people a day.
7 people a day.
Are committing suicide in Australia.
65,000 attempts of suicide. Now, as I said, I'm a country girl. I grew up in Port Pirie. That's Port Pirie, Port Augusta, Whyalla and Port Lincoln. That's our rural communities. And so let me talk about the National Mental Health Commission report. The commissioners are the experts in this space. 2,000 submissions were made to the Commission. They are the experts. They then called on 9 other reports which fed into it. It is 700 pages long. It has solutions that we can act on now if we show strong leadership, similar to the leadership that we had when the feds and the states came together. It has a blueprint for action which we can act on now. Simple solutions that can be put in place now.
Can I focus on one of them, because the key recommendation of the report, which the government sat on for 5 months, was to shift $1 billion of future hospital funding into community-based care. Now, that was immediately rejected by the minister. Your response?
This is not about shifting. This is not about shutting down. Sorry, this is not about shutting down hospital beds. And the modelling that's been done around the financing on that clearly shows that people will still get access to hospital beds. What the report is talking about is a reallocation of funding so that people can stay and work, they can flourish in their communities, that we can focus on the things that will prevent mental illness. It is not fun. It is not fun ending up in a hospital and being cared for. I went to John Cade on Sunday to visit a very dear friend who has an eating disorder. Now, the thing that's really hard for people to understand is that mental illness it's an illness. It's not a lifestyle choice, and we need to start to think really seriously about how we can put in place prevention and promotion, the focus on well-being, all of the things that are going to stop people from getting unwell.
Okay, very briefly, because I want to hear from the other panellists, but if you shifted, it'd be $200 million a year. This is the $1 billion is made up of 5 times $200 million, shifted from future hospital funding, so not losing hospital beds, into the community. How would it be used in the community? Because Ian Hickey, your colleague, says if it doesn't happen, lives will be lost.
That's right. It'd be used around, so there's a call for 12 trial sites to prevent suicide in areas that where there's examples that communities come together. It could be used around integration of services. How do you plug in those technologies that are actually going to support mental health professionals, whether they're GPs, mental health nurses, whether they're social workers, whether they're educators, whether they're school psychologists. It's really about local solutions that are about the person. So person-centred care to support the person, the family, the scaffold that sits around them, but really thinking how do you use those services to wrap around so that the person gets the right care at the right time without falling through the cracks.
Okay, I want to hear from both of our politicians on this. I haven't heard from Anna Burke for a little while. I'll start with you.
It's an epidemic and we don't talk about it. We used to put the heroin deaths on the front of the paper. We used to put the road toll, and the numbers are as bad and they're frightening. 1 million people each year worldwide, and for one person who succeeds, 20 have tried. The numbers are daunting. I'm sure, sadly, all of us have been to a funeral for someone who's committed suicide. I have. And it's not pretty. I've spoken about in the Parliament from a colleague who committed suicide, but I was at a funeral of a dear friend whose brother gave the eulogy, and he just said, my brother died from an illness. The illness killed him. And we need to accept that, and we don't accept that. But we need to get people going to their doctors early. We don't need them to wait 43 years like Andrew did. We need the prevention there at the beginning. We are obsessed with hospital beds in this country. Why are we waiting for everybody to end up at the bottom of the cliff in the ambulance going to the hospital?
That's a point. Anna, can I use that point to bring in the government? So, Andrew, you're listening to the argument. I no doubt you're well aware of what was in that report. You would also be aware that the Health Minister rejected immediately that recommendation. Why did she reject the recommendation to shift the money into the community where the experts say it's needed?
Well, I think that Firstly, you don't just knee-jerk. It's a very major report, right? And I do feel that the Minister, Susan Ley, who is an outstanding woman, she has said, I'm not going to knee-jerk react to this very good report.
But isn't that what she did when she immediately ruled out that particular key recommendation?
What's that?
When she ruled out that particular key recommendation,
no, but there's plenty of key recommendations in there, Tony. And the thing is, there are a lot of key recommendations. She has since put together all of the states from all the different political persuasions. They have agreed to act as a group, a unified group, to go through and respond to the priorities that have been set.
But can I just interrupt there, because Ian Hickey made this point last Thursday. Isn't this a point where the government, having got the report from all the experts, doesn't need to go out and find out what more experts think, but actually should lead and do something?
No, well, that's...
The sector's united. The sector is united. The sector is ready to act now. We don't need another advisory group, and we don't need more consultation. We want to shift the statistics. It's just a national tragedy. These are our young people who are dying. This is the future, the current.
Tony, let's hear it. We've got to be fair, we've got to hear
Andrew's answer. That report, on virtually every page, they talk about how fragmented the industry is. The sector is, not an industry. The sector is. And this was my reaction when I've been looking at it. There are literally dozens and dozens of small organisations, and I think it grew out of the fact that there has been, over these years, this stigma, and so lots of small groups set up local community activities, and they've done some wonderful things, but that needs to be brought together now, and that we don't need any more reviews, I agree, and we've got a report, but we do need to coordinate the response. The Headspace initiative, which is an outstanding program, that took agreement amongst all the states and the federal government, and that has grown and grown and grown, and it is serving all the young people. 75% of all of the problems start in the teenage years.
John Howard said that will happen, and it did. And the question is,
aren't you in a position? Why you woke up one morning and said that?
But aren't you in a position as a federal government to say this will happen and it will?
But our challenge is there are only 100 headspaces, or they're not even built yet. There will only be 100 headspaces. So Headspace is a fabulous initiative. It came out of the sector. It was driven by Pat and Ian and other reformers who were driving it. It came out of the need to provide a support service for young people. But we need to think about local community solutions and how we actually build on the capacity of those communities to respond. So when we say the sector is united, the sector is not just the mental health sector. This is across all portfolios. It affects education, it affects veterans and defence, it affects families, it affects social services. You think about communications, we've got the infrastructure around the support to be able to provide the technologies to actually plug in. I went to a conference today talking to school counsellors. They're screaming for examples of how they might be able to use this support because services are only open from 9 till 5. When's your greatest need?
Jane, can I just put you another area of mental health which hasn't been mentioned here tonight, and I think in the next 10 years it'll be the worst situation we ever had in this country, and that's ICE, because it is destroying a generation in Australia. I just, a few months ago, covered 4,000 kilometres in country Victoria talking to people about their ICE-addicted teenagers whose brains are being scrambled. When I was in the Melbourne jail last year, the assessment prison, the guards are telling me about guys coming back in there whose brains are fried. And when I was in Langi Kalkal, the jail I was moved to, a middle-aged drug dealer who was in there, looked like your local accountant. He boasted to me how he had effed Geelong one weekend by dumping ice into Geelong. He said we had people punching in the streets, and how he said I almost got caught in Horsham because they ran out of syringes. Now these horror stories and the mental destruction of a generation of young Australians, it is frightening, and I'm glad at least that the premiers are now talking about having some sort of ICE conference.
Dave, do you want to buy in on that one?
Well, I did a show at the festival, and I had a couple come to the show and got a photo afterwards, and the guy could have had trouble taking his photo, and his girlfriend said, don't worry about him, he's been up for 5 days. Now that's weird. For someone to come to a show because they've been on substances and haven't been asleep for 5 days, and they think it's normal. I'm happy they came to the show, don't get me wrong, but it's weird that that's accepted amongst people in this society. It's crazy.
Can I talk about, and I again did a conference presentation.
Let's
it was a
keep it
schools
brief,
conference, I will. It was a mum who talked to me. She's a mother of 5 children. Her daughter ended up as an ice addict. Now, the education system let her down and the health system let her down. Ambulance call-outs in country areas are up 198%. So I think to your point, and to the point we're making around mental health reform, we're talking about how do we actually support people so that they don't end up at the bottom of that cliff.
Yep, Andrew. I'll just give a quick final word to you on this and just go back to the point. I mean, if the government, if the Prime Minister on down were to say, let's do this, the main recommendation of this major task force, all the experts say the same thing, wouldn't it just happen?
No, I'm sorry. These things need consent and cooperation and commitment from every area of government. And, you know, as Jane was saying, it does affect so many different portfolios. Right? There are so many areas where you need to create a circumstance which is going to allow local solutions to apply. And that needs a cooperation. You need to, you know, there's been too many years where it's just been fragmented. That was what the report said. Don't repeat the fragmentation. Cut through it, make some decisions, provide the umbrella that's going to provide direction to all of these areas of portfolio and to the sector, and that's the way out of this thing, because fragmentation, there's a lot of, you know, very well-meaning people, but it's not touching the sides.
Okay, let's move on to a very different subject. Our next question comes from John Tyrrell.
Thanks, Tony. I've run a small business here in Melbourne for over 30 years. I'm happy to pay tax, provided it's spent properly and reasonably. But to have the Andrews government waste something like $500 million or so by scrapping the East-West link is got to be insanity, especially when everyone that I talk to thinks it will be built one day. So my question is this the worst case of wasting government money on record? And how can we stop Daniel writing that cheque?
Anna Burke.
Well, Daniel's not writing the cheque because the money's already been given to the consortiums by the previous government, who 2 weeks before caretaker...
He's writing another cheque for $400 million.
And the previous Napthine government, 2 weeks before the state election, signed that contract. 2 weeks before.
It will be built. It'll be built one day.
Look, my first job out of uni was at Vic.
Okay, no yelling out from the audience if you don't mind. We can't hear you anyway, just hear a loud noise.
My first job out of uni was at Vic Roads. This job's been on the cards for centuries. It's not something that people dreamt up yesterday, but it's not going to resolve the problem. It's not going to resolve the traffic problem because the road was always about getting people to the airport. Most of you aren't going to the airport, you're going to town. So if you want to build a road, let's resolve the bottleneck at Hoddle Street. That design was never going to do it. What we need is to get people off the road and into a light rail, which should be put down the Eastern Freeway. Because getting cars off the road is better for all of us, and the money that would have been spent on that project meant nothing else would have happened in Victoria for the next 50 years. No other project could have been funded because of those numbers.
I'm just guessing here, but could that be a slight exaggeration?
It could be. But if you want decent connectivity, the best connectivity we've had was under the previous government when they took out rail crossings. So once they did the Springvale Road crossing, when they took the train line under at Springvale Road. If you're in the eastern suburbs, you know what I'm talking about. Let's face it, my seat...
But if you're in Sydney or Brisbane or...
It's irrelevant.
You probably don't.
It's irrelevant.
The rest of the country's saying, what the hell is that about?
It's the same general argument.
5 minutes on the eastern, I'm going to get it. Once you took out the Middleborough Road rail crossing, you want better access, take out those rail crossings.
And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Anna Burke, just hang on. We've actually got another question on this subject. I'll go to that one because it's a slightly different take on it. Then we'll bring everyone in to talk about it. It's from Jonathan Zimmett. Yes, Jonathan.
So my question is, why is the government fixated on road building when the real congestion busters are public transport?
You mean the federal government?
The federal government, yeah. And why is the federal government now withholding the money that was previously earmarked for the East-West link from the public who have clearly voted in favour of public transport projects?
Well, before we go to the government, I want to hear from Derryn Hinch.
On the East-West, the sovereign risk, I think, was a major issue here. I think any government that comes in like Daniel Andrews, I wish what he would do now is say, look, 65% of you want us to build it, we'll do it. It's cost us, the desalination plant was such an expensive waste. This one will fix and we will build it eventually.
But he did say he wasn't going to build it. He actually said that.
That's true.
And the government knew he said that before they signed.
The problem is you've got so many bloody greenies trying to push us all on the public transport that they're trying to force cars off the road.
But it was two political parties playing chicken and it's cost everyone $500 million bucks. Yeah. Basically.
Well, so can I just to pick you up on that point, Derryn, and I'll come to you in a minute. Yeah. Sorry about that. But Tony Abbott himself said that election was going to be a referendum on this East-West link. Now the elections happened. The people who said they didn't want it got in. So isn't it logical that you get rid of it?
Daniel won.
Oh, that is true. Yes, that is quite true. But I think if you do any polls now and ask people, they say, yeah, we do want this built. And $500 million going out on top of the $300 million that's already spent by the Liberal government is crazy. I'd love Andrew to say, look, I campaigned this way, but I think this way, I agree with you, let's build it. Because if he gets thrown out in 3 years, then it will be built. And they've gone down for another.
Well, let's hear from Andrew, Robb. Go ahead.
Well, Anna did a pretty good job of defending the indefensible, I thought, but...
Okay.
What is it about me in this program?
I'll talk to you afterwards about that.
The show is not nearly over, and we have a question on that subject. If you just hold your horses. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. You've made that point. We're going to come to that question in a minute. So, Andrew, Robb, we're talking about something.
I had a proposition over here which said that the federal government was obsessed with roads. It's not true. Historically, the road funding in the major roads has been a Commonwealth responsibility and freight rail, and the rail transport has been the responsibility of the states because they ultimately run that infrastructure. And that's why there's been a traditional distinction. And we've gone back to, instead of 50-50 for road projects, to 80-20, where we're paying a lot more for the major roads so that the states have got the capacity to do the rail, which has been the long-term traditional distinction between those two. Secondly, Daniel, he did make the promise that he would scrap the East-West link, but he also said it would not do any damage to the reputation of Victoria or Australia from an investment point of view, and he also said that there would be no compensation. On both those counts, he has broken the promise. And I spent last week in the Middle East, 4 states. I've seen every sovereign wealth fund across the Gulf states last week. Not one of them failed to raise this subject with me. He has done amazing damage to our reputation as a country with no sovereign risk, and that is going to increase. There's going to be a premium put on interest rates for any infrastructure around Australia. So all Australians are going to pay for Daniel Andrews, not just the 7,000 people who haven't got a job as a result. And finally, Bill Shorten twice has submitted, when he was the head of the union, the AWU, he made formal submissions in support of the East-West link.
I'm just going to go back to Jonathan Zimmett, who's put his hand up. Second question, go ahead.
You mentioned the cost. I would have thought the biggest cost would have been building the road that the economic modelling suggests is only going to return less than 50 cents in the dollar for every dollar spent on the road itself.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know who does or doesn't drive over that bridge to Geelong, but you know, you're there for hours. It's a parking lot most mornings and most afternoons. The trucks and all of the rest that want to go not through the city but around the city, the eastern suburbs actually has a few million people in them. And those people who want to go around towards Geelong or the western suburbs without going through the city, they'd be interested too. It is, as all those on the panel have sort of acknowledged, it's going to be built at some stage. This was a political exercise. The finance sector's telling me that the CFMEU did not think they'd be able to control the French and the Spanish companies that ultimately got the contract. We've had both those governments respond. They knew they could control the rail project.
Okay.
And that is Daniel Andrews is very much beholden to him.
Absolutely. That is just ridiculous.
Well, tell the finance sector that.
Well,
it's
that's
not
just
me
ridiculous.
selling it.
And the cost analysis never stacked up. It never stacked up.
That's not true either.
The cost analysis was never there. And we've got projects that need to be done to assist with freight movement, particularly in the West. I agree with that. And this is getting boring for everybody else across the country.
Is there a chance that more companies might want to work with Victoria because you can get $500 million for doing nothing?
Dave, what do you think?
Pay that.
Dave, I will bring Dave in because there's a kind of philosophical debate that's going on here, a philosophical debate between cars and roads and public transport. And it's in a way reflected by the Prime Minister's own statement in his book Battle Lines that the humblest person can be king in his car.
I mean, we all love to be in our cars, no doubt. Well, if you've got a car, if you don't, you love to be in... Oh, anyway, wouldn't we love us... I mean, as the State Premier wants, I think, a rail system like London's, basically, and the underground there, and we're on our way. I mean, you know, they've got 270 underground stations. Once we build these next ones, we'll have 9. So, no, but, yeah, I mean...
But good infrastructure, I mean, it makes a healthy city. I mean, I don't think there's any debate about the need for good transport infrastructure. Living in the eastern suburbs, being on the Eastern Freeway to go out to the airport nearly every week, and having spent an hour and a half on Sydney's roads today, we've got some major challenges around transport. Some people don't have a choice. Some people have to drive. Now I have 3 kids, so I can't take my 3 kids on public transport. So to make a case between public transport and good roads, it is a non-issue to me.
I'm going to have to put that one to bed for a little while because we could go for a long time on that. But we've got a video question which we've got to get to. It's from Ethan Eggart in Darwin.
On the 27th of April, our government is going to deport a 10-year-old boy who is perfectly normal in every way. He can read and ride a bike, but he has autism. I went to after-school care with this boy, and he can't speak, but he can use sign language to communicate with us. If he can get along with us, and we can get along with him, why does he have to leave?
Now, Jane, might have to explain this for a general... I know you know a little bit about this, and that young man was so angry when he heard that his friend was going to be deported that he decided to send this question. He did, so I'd like your response first.
So the first thing I'd like to say to Ethan is thank you so much for standing up and having a voice. And this is an example of leadership of young people on issues that they care about. Disability and the stigma attached to disability is still rife across this community. Now, we hope that that's going to change with the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The question that Ethan asked was, what does this mean for this little boy who's going to be deported? Now, I am the mum of 3 children, as I've just said. Angus, my eldest, has both Down syndrome, he was born with it, and he lives with autism. He is non-verbal. He communicates with sign language and he communicates with an iPad. But he gives back to the community because it is about, to the original point, acceptance of diversity, supporting those who are vulnerable, and supporting families to look after the people that they care about. Now, to send this little boy back to a country that he doesn't know, without the support network around him...
We should explain, his mother is a nurse from the Philippines. She's been in the country for 8 years on a skilled working visa.
Skilled working visa.
Until it was discovered her son had autism.
Service.
People were happy to have her stay in the country. Now the Immigration Department knows she's got autism. They're being deported because he might be a burden on the health system here. That's the argument.
That's the argument.
Could I just... I mean, it sounds, and a terrible situation.
Well, it sounds horrifying.
It is, yeah, no, but just let me, from my experience, that year I had multicultural affairs. I also had responsibility for these sorts of issues, right? So the department has got a set of rules so that if someone comes in to Australia and, you know, they bring someone with them, and if they're looking for, so that they're not taking advantage. And I'm saying this woman did it all, right? But
this has got to sit outside of those rules.
No, well, I'm just saying it does.
It's got to be about empathy and compassion.
Hang on, Jane. Hang on. I agree with you. But the department's got the rules.
Can I just make one point? There is a fundamental point here, and that is the rules can be overridden by the discretionary power of a minister.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Let me finish, please, Tony.
Yeah.
The thing is, the department has these rules. It doesn't allow that situation to continue. They have to deport them. The tribunal, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, has the same rules, right? Therefore, this thing can go, and I had many of these instances. There's not one which I didn't allow the young person with whatever disability to stay in the country. But it goes to ministerial discretion.
The minister has the discretion.
Has the discretion to do this.
And the ministers over the years, there was a very similar case of a doctor who came in similar visa, child had Downs, went and had public outcry, and the minister used the discretion. The minister has the discretionary powers to do it, but it's not easy. And we've signed the UN Human Rights Convention for the Child that says we should also look after children with disabilities. There are many people advocating in this space that we need to change our basic rules. And it is difficult. You know, a lot of people want to come here. A lot of people do come here. So you do have to have rules, but the minister does have the discretion. And hopefully Ethan's case, they can get to their local member, Andrew can take it up, and we can see what... No, truly, that's what we're here for. Members of Parliament are actually here to actually hear cases and see if we can advocate on behalf of this.
I think it's a remarkable thing. We've got an 11-year-old boy in Darwin who used to be in daycare with this boy whose name is Tyrone. And he's made this appeal to the public. Now, Derryn Hinch, you'd appreciate that.
Oh, very much so, very much so.
What should happen next?
Well, it'll go to the AAT, yes. I would presume.
Yes.
And if it's an adverse decision there, which can happen, then, as you say, the minister then could step in and say, no, I'm going to overrule it and let him stay.
There will be a happy ending on this one, won't there?
There will be. I
mean,
I never knock back.
Imagine if it wasn't this happening, if it wasn't made a public case, it would just shut out his go.
That's not true.
There are cases, sadly, there are cases where there aren't happy endings. Let's be honest about that. There are.
There might be, but there's a lot of cases coming up.
Andrew, are you saying, can I just clear this up, are you saying that you would recommend to the minister that he actually looks at this case very carefully and use his discretionary power?
And as I said, in 12 months I had quite a lot of these cases. Most of them never got publicity. I agreed with Anna. There could be some who don't ask anybody any questions and find themselves deported, and that would be very sad. So there may be changes. There may be a case to change the rules. So if this sort of case comes up, it goes automatically, but I'm not sure. I mean, there are reasons for the rules, and there's reasons for the discretion, the obvious reasons, and I think every minister on either side of the House would make the right decision.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Tony, I've attacked the AAT, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, many times because it's let rapists and murderers stay in this country, and I've gone after them and had a couple of them deported. But on this occasion, I'd support you.
Jane, we're running out of time. In fact, we're over time, I think, so we're going to have to finish off there. So I'll give the last word to you. I imagine young Ethan, if he's actually up watching the show, and I'm told he does watch the show, be giving himself a bit of a high five with his mum right now.
I think he should be absolutely giving himself a massive high five. It's an example of a young person taking action, and if the minister does allow this family to stay, there could not be a happier ending to it. It's fabulous.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Derryn Hinch, Anna Burke, Dave Hughes, Jane Burns and Andrew Robb. Thank you. Thank you very much. Special thanks. Special thanks to everyone here, including our vocal TPP demonstrators who've joined us at the Melbourne Recital Centre, especially our audience for their great questions. Please give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. Next Monday, Next Monday, Q&A will be joined by John Howard's former Chief of Staff, Senator Arthur Sinodinos, the Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, Tanya Plibersek, historian Carolyn Holbrook, whose book Anzac, the Unauthorised Biography, analyses our shifting attitudes to Gallipoli, journalist turned diplomat turned advocate for Human Rights Watch, Tom Porteous, and the former Deputy Prime Minister and Ambassador to the Vatican, Tim Fischer. Till next week's Q&A, good night.